Awesome. So the first thing that I want to announce to all of you, and it was in my email to you on Thursday of last week, Wednesday we are Zooming class. Okay, if you want to come here and sit in the room, you are totally welcome to. I will be in Billings and I will be Zooming. Okay, so it'll be Zoom for everyone. Again, I have to go to a 2.5 day long meeting, but I have no problem skipping out and teaching my class and talking math because I'd much rather be talking about math with you all than the other stuff. So, okay, everyone on the same page here? Cool. Again, I apologize if that's an inconvenience for anyone. I just don't want to have to cancel class. So again, Zoom for all. Zoom for everyone on Wednesday. And this pen is done. Good thing we have another. Okay. All right. Let's see, I guess announcements, I believe section 1.3 is due by midnight tonight. We went through quite a few of those exercises in class on Friday. But that is due tonight by midnight. So please make sure you complete 1.3. Any questions there? No? All right. Well, are there any questions at all before I pick up where we left off on Friday? Okay. You guys all okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not used to such quiet classes. My other classes are a lot more vocal. So you're just speechless because the math is so darn utterly beautiful, right? You're not supposed to disagree. It's okay. Okay. So we were playing with some composition of functions last time. Wasn't that fun? Now, my hope is that you've maybe reviewed your notes from class last Friday, because my guess is you probably thought about some other things between class on Friday and class today. And hopefully gotten a fair amount of sleep in the interim. So I am going to pick up where we left off. What I am going to say is that I'm going to be doing an exam using the same functions from where we left off last time, because there's something I need to make a point about. Okay. All right. So I believe we had f of x is the square root of x plus 4. And we had g of x to be x squared minus 5. Okay. And we actually did them in general. Remember how at the end of class on Friday, we found f of g of x, and we also found g of f of x. And if you don't remember, the recording's posted to the box folder, as are the notes. So they're there ready and waiting. So what if I wanted to compute f of g of 0? Okay, now it might seem like, well, why are we going back to numbers when we were doing it in general? You'll see why in just a second. What does it mean to find f of g of 0? What do we do first? We find g of 0. Good. Can we compute g of 0? You bet. We get 0 squared minus 5, which is -5. So we found g of 0. G of 0 is -5. Can I now find f of -5? Well, you can try, but you're taking the square root of a negative number. What happens to you then? Okay, that's not a real number. Remember, you cannot take the square root of a negative number when you're dealing with real numbers. This is by definition our imaginary number or complex numbers. Maybe you studied them before. We're not really going to cover them in this class. You can't do it. It's not in the domain. What if I wanted to find g of f of, I don't know, how about -6? Can I do this one? Claim we're in a similar situation. You start and you work inside out, but f of -6 is equal to the square root of -2, and that's undefined in real numbers. So do you see how we're running into some domain issues? And that's probably not that surprising, given the fact that we've got a radical here. And once we have a radical, or once we are dividing by something with an x in our denominator, then there's some issues. Okay, so what I want to mention is as follows. You don't have a lot of these in your online homework, but they do exist. Okay. We've computed what f of g of x is and what g of f of x is. Okay. We've been working inside out and we've been playing, and it's just been a ball. Isn't it great that I'm telling you how you feel about it? Okay. So we've been playing with these. But what if I asked, what is the domain of them? If you want to find the domain, say, of f of g of x, the way you do it is you find the domain of the inner function, right? Like this example that we just did here, this wasn't even in the domain of my inner function, was it? No. Okay, so you want to find the domain of your inner function. The inner function. And then step 2, determine the composition function. In this case, it's f of g of x and its domain. And then what you do is you combine those domains. So essentially you find the domain of the inner function, because if what you're wanting to plug in doesn't even plug into your inner function, you're in trouble, or you're psyched because you don't have work to do. Okay, then you determine what your composed function is, find the domain of that, and then put them together. So for example, suppose I have f of x equals x plus 3. And I have g of x to be the square root of x minus 2. All right. What if I want us to find the domain of, well, we'll go both ways. Let's do g of f of x. Okay, what step one tells us is we first have to find the domain of the inner function. What is the domain of f of x equals x plus 3? Yeah, we have all reals, no restrictions, right? Because you don't have to worry about taking the square root of a negative number, and you also don't have to worry about dividing by 0. You with me there? Okay, so we did the domain of the inner one. Now we have to find g of f of x. Well, someone remind me, how do we start this process? Good job. You work inside out. We say we want to find g of f of x in this particular exercise. F of x is defined to be x plus 3. So now I find g of x plus 3. What does it mean to find g of x plus 3? Everywhere where I see an x in my function g, what am I plugging in? Thank you, x plus 3. So won't I have x plus 3 minus 2? Doesn't that simplify to be the square root of x plus 1? Well, now that I've determined the composition function, I now have to determine what the domain is here. What is the domain of g of f of x? Do I have domain issues for this guy? I do, because I got a radical, right? I can't take the square root of a negative number. So don't I take whatever's under my radical and say that has got to be greater than or equal to 0? Can I solve this inequality? Subtract 1 from both sides. Don't we get x is greater than or equal to -1? All right, so step 3 is combine them. If I combine my limitation here, which is not, with my limitation here, would you grant me that my domain, my only restrictions are these? I wasn't restricted by the inner guy. So you would say that the domain of this function is bracket -1 off to infinity. Now let's find the domain of, let's do f of g of x. We're just going the other way, same two functions for right now. Okay, what do? You find the domain of the inner function first, okay? G of x is x minus square root of x minus 2. Do you all agree I need x minus 2 to be greater than or equal to 0? In other words, the domain of my inner function is x is greater than or equal to 2. Any questions there? All right, so my next step in finding the domain of the composition function is to actually do the composition. We're doing f of g of x. How is g of x defined here? Isn't that the square root of x minus 2? So in other words, I'm finding f of the square root of x minus 2. You with me there? Okay. Well, what does it mean to find f of that? It means everywhere where we see an x in our function f, we're going to plug in this. You with me there? Okay, do I have any domain issues with this new function? Sure do. I got a radical. What do I have to take note of? Can't be negative. Notice adding this 3 at the end doesn't affect anything about what we're legal to plug in. So here's the domain of my composition. Well, if I take these two and put it together, they're the same thing anyway. Isn't it 2 off to infinity? I'm going to do another one. Suppose I have f of x is equal to 1 over x plus 4. And g of x is equal to 12 over x minus 2. Ew. I mean, you might as well feel something about the situation, right? Okay. What if I want us to find the domain of f of g of x? Okay. Well, in order to do that, the first thing we need to do is find the domain of our inner function g of x. What value can x not take on in my function g? Claim there's only one value we cannot have. 2. How come? Good. Remember, when you have a value of x in your denominator, your domain is that you can't divide by 0. Okay, I'm making the assumption that from our 1.2 section, you've got those two domain issues carried over, right? You can't divide by 0. You with me there? Okay. The next thing we need to do is we need to actually find what is f of g of x. Now, hopefully when you have messy things like this, you don't have to do it both ways because it's a pain. Can we find f of g of x? Yeah. Do we feel like it? Probably not, but that's f of, we plug g of x is 12 over x minus 2. Can I find f of this yuck? Yeah, what does it mean to find f of something? It means everywhere where you see an x in your function f, you're going to plug this in. Okay. Well, how is f defined? It's 1 over, in place of x, I put this stuff, plus 4. Thank you for making a facial expression. All right, not very pretty, but we can certainly simplify this. In fact, we were simplifying things just like this last week. Okay, this doesn't come up a lot, but it's really good for our algebra skills. How would we simplify this? What would you do here?
You need a common denominator.
Sure, we could get a common denominator down here. Good job. What would be my common denominator? So don't we have to write 4/1 with the denominator of x minus 2? So if I multiply my denominator by x minus 2, I better multiply my numerator by x minus 2. And would you grant me we get 4x minus 8? So do you see how I rewrote my fractions then? I just rewrote my 4 equivalently with that common denominator. Found my common denominator. Well, now that I have a common denominator, don't I have 12 plus 4x minus 8? Well, what can I combine in my numerator? What's 12 minus 8? 4. So don't I have 1 over 4x plus 4 divided by x minus 2? Notice this is saying 1 divided by this stuff. And when you divide by a fraction, what do? Multiply by the reciprocal. So it's 1 times x minus 2 over 4x plus 4. Here's my new function. Do I have domain issues here? Sure do, because I'm dividing, right? I got to ask myself, where is my denominator equal to 0? Well, we can solve this for x, yeah? First subtract 4 from both sides, oops. And then divide both sides by 4. Do you agree? -1 is going to cause us some problems. So we found the domain of the inner function. We then found the composition we were asked to find, and we found the domain of that. Now what we do is that step 3, and we combine them. Well, if I combine these two domains, I'm not allowed to have x be -1, nor am I allowed to have x be equal to 2. You with me there? All right. I honestly don't ask you these involved questions on the test. I don't think that they're worth your test time. But if it was on a test and this is what you put, it would be 100% correct. Okay, because implied in the statement is all reals except for -1 and +2. You do have these in your online homework. So we need to write this in interval notation. This is where online homework is a little more of a pain. Can we write this number line in interval notation? Yeah. Okay. What does this portion look like? -infinity to -1 with a parenthesis. Now I put that union. Now I put this stuff in here. What does that look like? You're right. Out here, we're going to do one more interval in between. We have 2 to infinity, but now I have to show that we can take on all the values in between those two. It's a pain. Do you want to do one more? Does anyone need to see another one? Would it be helpful? Okay, we'll just do one direction of one way. Okay, I'm gonna have h of x be equal to 3 over x minus 5. No, excuse me. Excuse me. Don't want to do that. Let's do g of x is x minus 5, and let's do f of x is 3 over x. Let's find the domain of f of g of x. All right, where do I start? Okay, on the inner function, what is the domain of g of x? I didn't hear. Okay, we'll compute that in a second. All we want to know right now is what the domain of this guy is. Do I have any limitations here? Do I have to worry about dividing by 0 in this one? No. Do I have to worry about taking the square root of a negative number in this one? No, we have no restrictions. So this is pretty sweet. It's all reals. The next thing we do is we find the composition and then find that domain. Well, to find f of g of x, we work inside out. How is g of x defined in this particular exercise? X minus 5. So we're finding f of x minus 5. Well, if this is how my function f is defined, what does f of x minus 5 look like? 3 over what? X minus 5. You with me?
Yeah.
Awesome. Do I have domain issues with this one? Yep, x can't be 5. So if you take x can't be 5, combine it with all reals, I claim it's still x can't be 5. Again, if I asked you this on a test, that would be a sufficient answer. On the online homework, we would need to enter this in intervals. Questions? All right. Another composition question. Suppose I define a function f of x. And I'm going to say that my function f of x is the number of miles driven in x hours. Okay, do you agree then that the units for my input are hours and that the units for my output are miles? You might ask, why are you pointing that out? And I'll say, hold on a second. What if I now tell you that we have another function g of p? And that is the number of gallons of gas used to drive p miles. What's my input and what's my output here? What's my input? Miles. And what's the output? Gallons of gas. I'm going to ask you a question. Which makes sense? F of G of P or G of F of X? And then we'll actually say what that composition tells us. Now let's think about the composition, okay? For this one, we start with P. You agree? Right? When you do the composition, you work inside out. Yes? So you start with P. P is the number of miles. You plug it in your function G, what comes out? Gallons of gas, G of P. Now, if I'm doing the composition, wouldn't I take that value now and plug it in my function F? Does it make sense to plug number of gallons in F? No, what is the input for F? Hours. Try it this way. Let's do this one. If I start with X, what does X represent? Number of hours. I plug that into F. What's my output for F? Miles. Is miles my input for G? Sure is. We'd plug that in G and then we'd get gallons. So this is the one that makes sense. What I want to tell you is when you're doing these composition of functions and they're in the version of a story problem, the input for the outer function must be the same units as the output for the inner function. We couldn't start with G because what comes out of my function G is gallons. And it makes no sense to plug gallons into my function F because the input is hours. But notice, we could start with X, the number of hours, because the output of my inner function is the same as my input for my outer function. What if I have this, A of D, and my D is the number of milligrams of pain reliever? And the output, A of D, is the perceived pain level. And suppose I have another function, M of T. T, my input, represents the time in minutes since the pain reliever was ingested. And the output is the number of milligrams of pain reliever in your system. Right, it takes a bit of time for you to absorb the drug. Which one of these compositions makes sense? I want you to think about it for a second. This is one. It's like we're at an eye doctor. Which is better, 1 or 2? I was just at an eye doctor recently. All right, I want to give everyone a chance to think about it, and then I want you to vote by putting either a 1 here in front of your chin or a 2 here in front of your chin. But play around. Remember how the output of the inner one needs to match the input of the outer one. And those of you on Zoom, if you want to chat it, you can. And if you don't want to respond, you don't need to. What do you think? Everyone vote. Okay. Anyone else have an opinion? I see that 1, 2, 3, 4 of you have voted. All right. Well, of the 4 people who voted, you voted correctly. Which one is the correct one? 2. Why? Let me show you. You start inside. My inner units are T, time. What comes out of this function here? Isn't it the number of milligrams that comes out? And that's what we would then plug in A. And isn't our input for A the number of milligrams? And then it's perceived pain level. Does anyone want me to go through and show you why this first one does not make sense? Okay, the reason why my first one does not make sense is let's play with our inputs, outputs. We start with D, right? The number of milligrams. Okay, the output is my perceived pain level. You with me that far? Well, according to this, now I'm going to plug that thing into my function M. Is that what my input for M is? No, the input for M is time, not perceived pain level. So because these 2 things are the same, it has to go from here to here and then to here. Now, what does A of M of T mean? Essentially putting it together, isn't it the perceived pain level after T minutes of ingesting your pain medication? Are there questions on that? This is kind of funky, isn't it? All right, I want to share my screen. All right, so a couple of things. Number one, that is the end of section 1.4. So I am going to set your online homework to be due a week from today. I'm not done with class yet, but I want to. So today is September 19th, so 26. Cool. All right. So don't forget that 1.3 is due tonight by midnight. What I want to do is just show you in 1.4 what to expect. Okay. So on this first one, what you are doing, I'm just going to take you through a couple of these to make sure that you got it. Okay. Here, these are what we did last time, right? You start with 0. First, you plug it in G, whatever comes out, you plug in F, and then the other way around. Is everyone okay there? If you have a question, you got to let me know. Okay. Now, number 2, I'm going to do with you right now. Your number 2 is going to look different than my number 2. The numbers are going to be slightly different, but I want to show you how cute it is when you have a table. Okay. So starting here, we work inside out. We want to find G of 8. Doesn't that mean we're taking the value of 8 and plugging it into our function G? What is G of 8? Not a rhetorical question. G of 8 is 2. Whoa, this is going to be hard. G, oh, it's so hard to write on this thing. Of 8 equals 2. Does everyone see how we got that? Right? You plug in 8, we want to plug it in our function G, and 2 comes out. So now, aren't we going to replace G of 8 with 2? And we want to find F of 2. What is F of 2? 7. So the answer here is 7. Now, let's just do this bottom one. These are kind of dumb, but we'll do it anyway. Where do I start on this bottom one? G of 6, you start on the inside. What is G of 6? It's 1. So we replace G of 6 with 1, and now we want to find G of 1. What is G of 1? 8. Isn't this cute? Kind of like playing ping pong. For some reason, I think of it that way. Okay, let me get out of here. And this is the other one I want to show you. And then the rest are going to be everything that we've done. This one in number 3, but of course, I'm happy to answer questions, okay? So like anything you have for me first thing Wednesday, I'm totally there to answer questions. With this one, instead of looking at a table, you're going to look at 2 graphs. Here's the graph of F of X, and here's the graph of G of X. I love these questions. Hint, hint, they will be on your test. Okay, let's start with this one. We want to start with F of G of 5. Okay, where do we start here? What do we want to find? G of 5. This says, do you know how to read graph? The graph. Okay. Well, what is G of 5? You go over to your function G. Here's my input of 5. What comes out? 3. So you replace the G of 5 with 3. Can I find F of 3? What is it? Well, here's X equals 3. What's my function value? It's 0. Want to do one more? How about we do F of 4? Okay. F of 4. We start with F of 4. What is my function value F of 4? 3. So I replace this F of 4 with 3. And oops, and now I want to find my function value at 3. What is F of 3? 0. You with me here? Are there questions? Okay, I like to be sure that we're all on the same page. So here you get to do a couple compositions. Here you get to do a triple composition. Don't freak out, do it step by step, but I want everyone to try it on their own. It's not as yucky as it seems. And then there's some domain questions. And then this is kind of like the word problem. What makes sense, or when we're doing this, like which order of composition makes sense. Okay. So again, section 1.3 is due tonight by midnight. Section 1.4 is due a week from today by midnight. And on Wednesday, everybody's Zooming. Remember, no in-person class here on Wednesday. I'm out of town, so we'll just Zoom and we'll meet on the Zoom channel that's on our Moodle page. Sound like a plan? Awesome. Thanks. I know it's a lot for a Monday, but